touch each other, please. They go right down deep, and they have collided. So both the BWT cars collide.
So it's an Nissan squabble between the two Williams. Look to me like Rosberg tapped the back of Webber. That is absolutely the last thing any Formula One team wants to see.
That's Alesi and Heidfeld. I don't know what's happened, but it's the big poor Alain Prost, as if he hadn't got enough pressure on him.
We've lost a wheel. It's a racing engineering car that's ripped his left wheel off. Furious at his teammate. That will be a very fun team briefing.
Hello there. Welcome to the Teammate Collision podcast from GP Rejects. And my name is Jeremy, you're one of your co-hosts, and I'm here with my fantastic colleague, Lennart.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Lennart. How are you doing today? It's officially the end of my summer holiday, but this is probably why I'm feeling bright and breezy, that I've actually been relaxed. How was your summer?
Well, I was generally going to say quite good, but the thing is, we kind of lacked the whole summer part over the last couple of weeks. Like, it's been more or less raining straight for at least 10 days now, so not much summer to speak of.
Yeah, I mean, here in Helsinki, I feel like most of the summer heat wave news has been coming from the south of Europe. Up in Helsinki, for example, it's just been, as you say, like raining for the last couple of weeks. So we've had a pretty good in comparison to the poor people down in Rhodes. But the only thing fiery shall be our opinions in the next hour or two on this podcast. We're going back to basics. On the Teammate Collision podcast, we are doing something rather revolutionary in that we are going to talk about teammate collisions. Exactly, I know. That's my reaction exactly. Lennart sent me this video, which FOM released a couple of days back, about 25 different teammate collisions. And I was a little bit skeptical. Should we talk about a video, for example? But then I actually saw it and went, oh my goodness, this is fantastic as a subject. So we are going to go through all the 25 and actually a couple more famous teammate collisions of the past 30 or so years. And basically give them arbitrary ratings. I'm going to give them awards. Lennart, you told me you had some kind of numerical star system. Do you want to explain that a bit more?
Yes, indeed. As we are, or more precisely, as I am German, everything must be neat and tidy. So we must have the numbers to sort everything out. And basically what I did was look at each collision rated on how unnecessary it was from a team perspective, how entertaining it was, so to speak, how much it was affected by the situation of the race, whether it happened early, late, whether it was decisive or whether it was for P nowhere. And then I rated it in a star system with up to 5 stars, from 1 star to 5 stars, like the old YouTube review system or the wrestling scale by David Meltzer, whichever one you prefer. So, yeah, we're going to give you our opinion on the crashes so you know how to feel about them without having to think for yourself.
Yeah, indeed. I'm interested in the first thing you said about how you're going to rate them. First of all, a fantastically complicated system. I didn't understand half of it, but one of the things that you said at the beginning was how unnecessary a crash was. Were there any crashes which came up as necessary on your list?
Well, obviously, especially from a team perspective, none of these are necessary. But if we are talking about to take one away for... Actually, no, I'm not taking away any of the list for those who have not seen the video. But if we are talking about two drivers fighting for a win in the final stages of a race, it's more understandable that they'd be going all in. And, well, if you go all in, you sometimes end up with nothing. So,
okay. We're not going to do these entirely based on the order. So if you have seen the video that FOM released a few days back, it's called something like 25 teammate collisions in F1. We're not going to do it in the exact order. What we're going to do is, we've grouped 2 particular rivalries, to put it that way. One at the beginning, one at the end, for thematic purposes. So this won't be exactly in the order, but basically close enough. So maybe, Lennart, as you decided this order, do you want to tell us what the first teammate collision, the Teammate Collision podcast, is going to comment upon?
We are going to look at the quintessential rival of the mid-2010s. Well, the second most quintessential rivalry, but that's neither here nor there.
We've already derailed your point before you made it.
Let me start that again.
No, carry on. No
Okay,
worries.
we're going to talk about Rosberg versus Hamilton, the old Mercedes rivalry for the 14, 15 and 16 World Championships. And we're going to do them in reverse chronological order of the three accidents that appeared in this video. So our first one is going to be the collision at Austria 2016.
Yeah. Before we talk about it, yeah, as you say, it's like it was hyped by the media and by Sky and by Channel 4 and by everyone else at the BBC as well as being like, Rosberg Hamilton, it's the biggest rivalry since Senna and Prost, and they really, 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 really wanted it to be like that. And sometimes the drivers bought into it, sometimes they didn't. Everyone knows, of course, you were referring to the biggest rivalry of the 2010s was Romain Grosjean and Lap 2. But
indeed, a challenge for the
we're
ages.
talking about Austria 2016. So what happened? Rosberg was in the lead. We was basically the last lap. Hamilton was catching him left, basically hand over fist. Went for an overtake into the basically uphill right-hander at the A1 ring. What's it called these days? Red Bull ring.
That's the name.
So
it was the name at the time as well. So
Rosberg took it very well. It was Rosberg's fault, in my opinion. Are you with me on that at least?
yeah, very much. It's very
hard
clumsy.
to spin it. Yeah, it's hard to spin it any other way. Basically, Rosberg goes straight ahead. He's on the right into the right-hander. Hamilton's trying to overtake on the outside on the left. Rosberg basically goes straight ahead. He takes his turn super late, and as a result, he and Hamilton hit each other. Rosberg's front wing gets damaged, and he drops back to fourth, and then gets a penalty after the race, still fourth. Yeah, this comes down to that law which you always talk about, where it's like, don't ascribe malice to something which could easily be incompetence, but I don't know, like either Rosberg completely fluffed up the corner, which would be fantastically coincidental seeing it as the last lap, or he deliberately did so just to absolutely make sure Hamilton wouldn't get past at his own cost. And it's like, yeah, of all the incidents, in my opinion, between Rosberg and Hamilton, this is the only one which I would say was either of their fault specifically. Like, it was definitely Rosberg's fault, this one, and this is probably the only one I would say which actually was not ambiguous. What's your opinion on it?
Yeah, I mostly agree. I would actually go with the Hanlon's razor you mentioned. I actually do think it's more clumsiness by Rosberg than anything, but that doesn't make it any less his fault. So, yeah, that's on him, and tough luck. So, and of course, in that case, well, I don't want to call it karma, but it was kind of karma because he ended up with the damage and he ended up losing places, whereas Hamilton went on to obviously win the race and take the valuable points.
Yeah, it reminded me, if I might make a up-to-date current reference to be cool and hip with the kids, at the Belgian Grand Prix this year, Sainz knocked Oscar Piastri into the wall at La Source, and he himself basically screwed up his suspension and retired about half the race later or so. And it's like, do we ascribe penalties? Do we ascribe rejects of the race and all these kind of awards to drivers who also kind of screw themselves over? It's like he already punished himself, and Rosberg was the same. He got a penalty afterwards, which he deserved. But also, like, do we ascribe penalties when the driver has already basically fluffed up their own race, as Rosberg did? Like, the penalty didn't change anything, and he had already lost his win. In fact, he wasn't even on the podium. It's like, he also, most importantly probably, lost 13 points to Hamilton in the championship as well, when the championship swing was happening.
Yeah,
So,
that is a philosophical question at its core. So, in the sense of, does punishment have to be constant, regardless of how much the driver in question or the team in question or whatever in question booted themselves in the head already? So, everyone is perfectly fine to have their opinions on that.
Doesn't it also strike you as like 10-second time penalty for Nico Rosberg? When was the last time we had a 10-second time penalty which wasn't for 2 5-second time penalties added together? Like nowadays in 2023, it's before we get too much into old men yelling at clouds. Like there are no major penalties at all ascribed anymore, and
yeah, it's also worrying. But the thing is, that would be going way off topic, especially talking about the Formula E season finale. So I won't do that. But I think we should bring them back. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and this was the last, I would say, major collision, or at least any major kind of, if we ignore the Abu Dhabi rubbish where, you know if you've ever seen it, the very end of Abu Dhabi where Hamilton was basically deliberately going slowly to push Rosberg into third place runner. I think it was Vettel at the time. That kind of rubbish was happening, and that wasn't a collision. And this whole thing really overshadowed the most important thing, which was that Pascal Wehrlein got 10th in a manner, which was what people really should have been focusing on. And had they taken each other out, he would have been 8th, which would have been wonderful.
As close to a national holiday as GP Rejects will ever have, given as we are not a nation.
No, not yet.
Well, I for one rated it a 2 out of 5 stars because that was the one I mentioned earlier where an accident is, well, not necessary, but it's understandable. It was the last laps, they were fighting for a Grand Prix win, they were in the midst of a championship battle, so it's really hard to blame either one for going for it, but of course, and costing Mercedes points. It also wasn't the most dramatic collision either on that video or in that rivalry itself, so yeah, that is a very 2 out of 5 star, very low one on the list, but it is what it is.
I actually heavily disagree with that. I would say the most contentious crash they ever had was that one, because that was the one where it was just like, this is over. There's no way this can possibly continue, like, from here on in. Like, they hated each other, clearly, by that time. There was so much rubbish in the playing silly buggers with each other in end of 2015, and well, the next crash, of course. But, like, 2 stars out of 5 is surprisingly low. I would say that's, when it comes to, like, heated and most... Yeah, like, I would say heated crashes between two people, that must be one of them in the last 10 years or so. If you had an arbitrary top 5, I would easily put that in one of the most important crashes that maybe happened. Maybe not consequentially, but in its context, it was a massive thing. The fallout for that was maybe even worse than it was for any of the other ones that they did together.
I can't blame you for that viewpoint, so... But I'm sticking with those for one. Now, I think it will become more obvious when I reveal more of my other ratings, so...
Yeah, I actually didn't have any arbitrary award for this, so I will leave you waiting for the next one, which is, unsurprisingly, Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton again, that very same year at the Spanish Grand Prix.
Yeah, that one is pretty contentious as well. The story of this one is, it's lap 1, Rosberg wins the start until turn 1, but after the launch period, his engine mode is not quite the right one, so as he fiddles to correct it, Hamilton has a significant speed advantage coming out of the second part of that kind of chicane that the Circuit de Catalunya has, and as they make their way toward that pseudo-hairpin, Hamilton has a speed advantage, tries to go in to the inside, which Rosberg covers up, and Hamilton ends up on the grass, loses control of his car, spins out, and takes Rosberg with him.
Yes. So my dad raised me on Formula One. And while I disagree with most of the things that he says, he invented this law or razor or whatever you want to call it, which I'm just going to call the Damon Hill law, which I think this is a good time to bring it up. I've never brought this up before in any previous episodes. It's the law that when Damon Hill was behind Schumacher in the championship and behind him in the race, and it was clear that Schumacher was going to win, Damon Hill would slam into Schumacher and take him out the race. This is not my opinion. This is my dad speaking. I don't necessarily agree with this. But if we applied this law to Rosberg and Hamilton, Rosberg had just won the previous 7 races in a row. He had the advantage in Spain. He was in the lead. And at that point, seeing as Mercedes ostensibly and officially had a hold your position policy, basically after the first lap, Hamilton was going to do anything he possibly could to take that place away from Rosberg. I'm not saying that makes it Hamilton's fault, because I think this was a racing incident. I think it was just completely bad timing that Hamilton made a massive lunge at the same time that Rosberg was not in a position to give his full concentration onto the corner. There's lots to this. There's so much to this. I think reviewing it as its own incident is almost impossible, because Hamilton was desperate to get ahead of Rosberg in the race and in the championship. Rosberg was absolutely fed up with his position at Mercedes, and the fact that he was now I think the fact that he was now actually winning the championship just made him even more pissed, and even more, how should you say, like, he was not going to give that position up under any circumstances. And that it goes all the way back to 2 years before that at Bahrain, where I think this whole thing started, whereby there was a complete sea change in how they actually raced with one another. Like Hamilton, in that race, for example, I'm absolutely adamant that Hamilton was pushing Rosberg off the road unfairly, and it went completely against most of the racing code, especially as teammates, because they were teammates, and Hamilton was not treating Rosberg with the respect which teammates should. My opinion, that's all it is. But I think that whole thing leads up to an incident like Spain, where it's like neither of them have any respect for the other, and they took each other off, and good riddance. Like, it was always going to happen. If Toto Wolff was like surprised after the race, how on earth did this happen? Like, it's obvious how it happened. This is because it had been brewing for 2 years, basically.
Yeah, I guess there's a reason very rarely championship contending teams actually have 2 number 1-ish drivers around anymore, or generally. So, yeah, you pretty much described it well. I am going to leap off a particular point you made, which is going to tie into a lot of the incidents we're going to talk about later. Well, actually, let me take this back to the real road, so to speak, for a bit. It is generally, at the very least, that's how German car insurances handle it. Generally, the principle, the driver who is behind, if an accident happened, and the driver who is behind runs into the back of the car ahead, it is generally assumed the driver at the back is at fault unless an investigation showed the driver had acted erratically, or there was something else that made it unavoidable. And in a way, this is an attitude I, for one, have taken on board with evaluating Formula One crashes as well. And that is why I'd say I agree with your assessment that it's a racing incident. But the thing is, Hamilton did have the speed advantage, but he never got to a point where he was so much as side by side with Rosberg out of that corner. By the time Hamilton went all in on the inside, Rosberg had perfectly covered it off and was still pretty much fully ahead. So at that point, Hamilton just had to back out, which he wasn't going to do. And so I would say, again, as a steward, I probably wouldn't be giving either guy a penalty, but as a team owner, I would have given Hamilton a rough seeing too, so to speak. So, yeah, in the end, that was a point. And again, we're going to come, or at least I am going to come back to that down the road often. There comes a point at which you need to back off, especially when you're racing your teammate. There comes a point where you have to pull out, which is earlier than I would say racing against other guys, but generally just there's a point where you have to pull out. Hamilton didn't see that at the time or ignored it. I don't know. I can't look into that. And yeah, it happened. Both Mercedes were out. Max Verstappen won the first of many Grand Prix he would go on to win. And yeah, that's a pretty silly accident. All in all, it was on the first lap. It was mostly avoidable, even if it was brewing and the consequence of long-standing distaste between the two. And that's why I personally rated 4 out of 5 stars.
Yeah, I would agree with that rating. 4 out of 5 seems a bit more appropriate. I would say that, yeah, that's about fair. Like, it's a really dramatic crash to watch. I remember watching it back in the days where you had these like television recorders and you could just rewind what you had just watched when you were watching live television. Those were the days, weren't they? But I remember watching it with my dad, and my dad was making lunch, and I was like, "Holy heck, Dad! Look at the television! Like the Mercedes are just crash each other off on the second or third turn." And so we just rewound it and watched it over and over and over again for 5-10 minutes before we actually just watched the rest of the race. It was a pretty it was a really dramatic crash, and probably the most dramatic of the year, aside from perhaps Austria. But yeah, I think my main point is, like, as where it was with Schumacher and Hill, as it was with Senna and Prost, speaking of people who crashed a lot, and even Verstappen and Hamilton, like, there was no fair play and there was no respect between the two of them. And over time between Rosberg and Hamilton, the respect just got less and less and less, and to the point where it's like one of them had to go. I would say my award for this one is the most unintended consequences award is the one I'm awarding to this crash, because the most interesting thing about that race was that it was Max Verstappen's first win completely on merit on his first race for Red Bull when he was only 18 years old, and look now where Formula One is.
If only we had seen the signs back then.
Good job, Rosberg and Hamilton. You gave us this best year now. But so, most unintended consequences award. Shall we move on to our third and final Rosberg and Hamilton?
Well, I guess we have to, but I'm going to keep this one really short. This was the Belgian Grand Prix of 2014. It was the first lap, again. And Hamilton was ahead of Rosberg after the long straight. Rosberg had a look at Hamilton on the... Was it the outside or the inside? I actually don't even remember. In the inside.
It was the inside.
And
going to Lecum, is it?
Hamilton got his rear tire clipped, got a puncture, and Rosberg took a bit of damage to his front wing. And if you think I'm sounding bored describing this crash, it's because I jolly well was. This was in the videos order, the third one, and compared to the other one we just talked about, it was an absolute nothing story. This was absolutely inane. Stuff like that happens in like every third open wheel race, generally not between teammates, but with lesser consequences. The only reason people remember this one is because Hamilton got a puncture and he said, "Nico hit me." And I was so fucking bored of their rivalry at the time, so I was just, goddamn this rivalry, goddamn Mercedes, 1 out of 5 stars, piss off.
Yeah, I won't add too much more than that. Racing incident, it was fluffed up to be much more than it was because the media really, really wanted them to hate each other. Hamilton, instead of retiring, spent the rest of the race in last, complaining, asking for a penalty, asking them when he was... That was it. Yeah, I remember now. He was asking to be retired, and the team kept him out. He wanted to just go home, kind of thing. And I guess I can sympathize with it, but like, yeah, it just... We've spoken in the past about how if Senna and Prost had the same team radios we now have in the present day, would we see Senna and Prost as a bunch of whiners going, get that guy disqualified? No, he should have a 5-second penalty because he scraped his front wing off of my wheel. And
100% we would.
Because they were hard enough to bear. Like, some people really like that stuff, but I find interviews of Alain Prost and stuff absolutely unbearable to watch. Like, they're just miserable bastards. Pardon my French. And it's just like having that happen on like full team radio with Murray Walker trying to like explain what's going on.
It would.
Just doesn't sound very fun.
I mean, even back then, in particular Alan Prost's particular nature got parodied. Like there's this, what's the show called? Fry and Laurie?
It's Fry and Laurie.
And that skit is famous. And funnily enough, because the fictional driver never was called Michael, everyone thinks it's about Michael Schumacher, so. Well, anyway, yeah, this one, I do not want to talk about it anymore, so let's talk about more fun accidents, which is where we actually go back into the order they were shown on the video. And that is none other than a Minardi incident, which there is going to be another one of, so chapeau to Formula One management for actually remembering that backmarker teams used to exist.
Yeah, who would have known that Formula One didn't start in 2014? Though if you check YouTube, you would be forgiven for thinking so. The Italian Grand Prix of 1993 had 2 teammate collisions in it. This is the first one. I would rate this about 10 out of 10 on the stupidity scale. So let's not forget in context, this was the last lap of the race. The Minardis were crossing the line to finish, I think it was P8 and P9. Christian Fittipaldi went way too quickly to try and get past Martini over the line, clipped his front right, whatever it was, basically the front of his car off of the back of Martini, and flipped in the exact same way that Mark Webber has done. It's one of the most famous short clip videos in Formula One history, probably. He does a full backward somersault, lands with 3 wheels still on his car, over the line, and still got 0 points because he was still in 9th place. So if you look at this on the Wikipedia stats, for example, you wouldn't be able to notice it because he crossed the line, so he was classified as a finisher 1 lap down. It's one of those mysteries. If you'd never seen the footage, you would never know that it had even happened. Yeah, I rate this 10 out of 10 on the comedy scale and also the pointlessness scale. I don't know, what was your rating for
this one kind of broke the scale a bit, because I'm going to have to take people back a bit to the internet of the mid to late 2000s. Back then, we didn't have all the mimetic, so to speak, for lack of a better term, clips where you have weapons of every accident uploaded within 10 minutes of it on Reddit. We barely had image boards, and internet speeds were nothing like they are today. So, but even then, this particular GIF, this particular incident is all over the scale. It was found almost everywhere where Formula One was discussed at the time. And it's one of the first things you saw back then when you looked into Formula One things. And I guess up to a point it still is today. And thus, while it was on the last lap for position, and that actually was the last non-point pay position, it was actually 7th and 8th. And so I kind of get it. So it's not a 5 on 5 on that merit, but again, just because of the crash itself, the way it impacted Formula One internet communities in the early ages, it's gotta be a 5 out of 5. 5-star crash.
It's just if you only see it out of context, you see this incredible crash and wow, how did that happen? How did he land? How did he survive? And then you realize it was literally them crossing the line to the finish line. It's what the hell is the matter with you?
It's just almost an art form as far as teammate collisions go.
Yeah. So I give it the What is the Matter with You award, which is, I think it's probably self-explanatory. Our next crash is from later on in the 90s, which I would probably put as one of the most embarrassing, or at least consequentially embarrassing, crashes. And that is David Coulthard and Mika Häkkinen at the Österreichring in 1999.
Yes, that was, again, another very early race incident. We're going to feature a lot of those. And more or less, it was just Coulthard trying to go down the inside of Häkkinen when no such gap existed. He ends up spinning Häkkinen into the dirt, while Mika, if I recall correctly, would recover from that. It didn't help either of them. And Coulthard himself pretty much admitted that he screwed the pooch on that one. So, yeah, very avoidable, so to speak.
Yeah, it's one of the dumbest crashes on this list, for many reasons. Not only was he being very, very, very aggressive against his teammate, who was the world champion and also fighting for the next world championship, but McLaren were in a situation where they didn't have nearly as much to lose. Or no, sir, I'll say the opposite. They had much more to lose than Ferrari did, because Schumacher was out. Schumacher was not going to be fighting for this championship, and Eddie Irvine was being propped up by his teammates to help win this championship. So you had a scenario now whereby all Häkkinen had to do was just finish in first with Coulthard behind him, and they would just build up that gap and beat the Ferraris. But Ferrari had the advantage whereby they were propping up one driver, and if the McLarens were hitting each other and crashing each other out, then they weren't going to win. And indeed, Häkkinen took till the last race to win the championship. And imagine if he'd lost. Imagine if Häkkinen had not won the championship. We would look at that Coulthard-Häkkinen crash where Coulthard took out his teammate on the first lap. It was on the same uphill corner, actually, if I'm not mistaken, that Rosberg and Hamilton crashed at 17 years later. And I gave this one the highest stakes award because it was so close in history to being the most in terms of like consequences, in terms of embarrassment, in terms of like what are you doing kind of crashes. Coulthard nearly cost his teammate a championship for no reason, basically.
Yeah, interesting. That is a very interesting point, which I didn't even consider when making my rating. So I'm going to actually bump it up a star. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. It was start of the race, which is generally pretty unnecessary in terms of teammate collisions. And yeah, it was out of the lead. But the crash itself wasn't particularly anything to write home about. Again, kind of stuff that happens like every second race. Again, rarely between teammates, though. But yeah, just a solid 3 out of 5.
I will also just say, like, for the record, like, Coulthard had a strong 1999, if I remember correctly. I remember his 99 was among one of his better years, but I may be misremembering. So I don't want to just rag on Coulthard. Well, it is fun to rag on Coulthard because why
I
not?
think we did that a lot in the 2003 episode, so we want to give the poor guy a break.
Poor David Coulthard. Yeah, like I don't want to say that this is like emblematic of David Coulthard or anything like that, but it is like, to give him his due, he wasn't a bad driver. It's just like that incident in particular is like that could have just ruined everything. That could have given Eddie Irvine a championship, which
would have been
I think would have maybe upped your star rating if that.
Yeah, that would probably be at the very least a 4 out of 5, possibly a straight up 5 out of 5. And on to the next one, where we go back to a familiar face on this very podcast, Nico Rosberg, who happened to crash into a different teammate before that long period with Lewis Hamilton.
10 years before the incident in Austria, we had Nico Rosberg's very first year, where he was very young. He was only like 21, and he was teammates with Mark Webber at Williams. Williams were having this whole restructuring thing. Where have we heard that before? They were trying to get themselves back to the front. They made a big gamble and hired this young guy called Rosberg, second generation driver. Got a Ferrari when he was 18. There was a bit of like a playboy kind of, same kind of vibe as Jenson Button had. And I think Mark Webber's a nice guy, but he's Australian, and Australians like a bit of banter. So I think as the season went on, they kind of liked each other a little bit less and less. Webber started calling him Brittany, and I think that kind of exploded as well after this crash. So we haven't got to the crash yet. So basically it was the last race of the year, and the Williams crashed into each other. You probably remember the details more than I do, but I remember Rosberg wipes out Webber. Take us through the crash if you remember
it's
more
pretty
precisely.
Simple. It was turn. The problem is I have to kind of count Interlagos turns mentally, because the first complex is a bit inconsistent in what counts as a corner and what doesn't. Anyway, the long straight after the Senna S, the corner, that one, that follows it. That was where Rosberg just came in, crashed into Webber, took out the Australian, damaged his own car, and ended up wrecking at the end of the first lap, bringing out a safety car. which incidentally had a ripple effect as it put Schumacher and Fisichella closer together, which ended up causing Michael's puncture, which was the first stage of that impressive, amazing, breathtaking, whichever positive term you want to apply for it, recovery drive. So that's that, but yeah, this one is also a very straightforward thing. I talked earlier about how I generally am of the opinion that the driver at the back who crashes into the back of someone else is most likely going to be at fault for it. This one is pretty straightforward. Rosberg screwed the pooch. Webber got punished for it. It took out Williams, their last chance to overtake Red Bull in the points. Imagine that. Williams having a chance to pass Red Bull in the points. And in turn, imagine that from a perspective of someone in 2005. Red Bull would be ahead of Williams in the championship. Only a year after that, so... Weird Formula 1. Anyway, it's just...
Yeah.
Yeah, silly, avoidable, bad, not good. Whichever term you want to use for it.
Yeah, it's like the whole thing about woolly mammoths were not yet extinct when the pyramids of Egypt were being built. And it's like I think it's still a bit mind blowing now in retrospect that Webber and Rosberg shared a garage in Williams in 2006. Like, you don't associate them too much with each other. I don't think they had very much beef or interesting drama at any other time during their simultaneous careers. But yeah, Webber didn't really like Rosberg very much, I don't think, when they were teammates. I think he started the whole Britney thing because Rosberg was he was a young playboy diva, and he had long, luscious blonde locks, and like, yeah, you could see where that kind of cynicism would stem from Webber's side of things. But I put it as my award for it was "It Can Only Get Better From Here" award, because of course this was probably Williams' low point of that year. Afterwards, Nico Rosberg, who 10 years later would become world champion, Mark Webber would become world champion in 2010, and we're still waiting for Williams to have their own fantastic world championship revival one day when there's enough venture capitalists pouring enough money into the team for it to happen.
Yeah, I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. It's early race accident, which is, again, not good. But the thing is, it's very one-sided in terms of who's to blame. The crash itself, it looks more dramatic than it actually is, especially with the effects afterwards. And let's be honest here, no one remembers that part about the 2006 Brazilian Grand Prix. So, yeah, 2 out of 5. More annoying than anything else. Yep. So,
no, I agree with that. Our next video is two drivers you may have heard of, Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost, at the 1989 Japanese Grand Prix. Not to be confused with the 1990 Japanese Grand Prix, where they also crashed, but they weren't teammates at that time, so it doesn't count. It means that FOM had to find a different video for Senna and Prost.
Yes,
yeah. So, sorry, that was us. I didn't really throw.
No. The thing is, I guess we both were silent because this is one of the more controversial rivalries in Formula One history, and well, depending on what we're saying, we're going to have our heads caught for. So,
is there anything of worth we can throw into the Senna Prost debate about the 1989 Japanese Grand Prix collision? Is there anything we can add which would actually add to the conversation?
The only thing I have that isn't repeating the old shoot upon points is that James Hunt said Senna was at fault, so...
James Hunt was always right about everything.
Well, yeah. But that's probably something people don't remember, so you asked me for something new.
Yeah. That's true, yeah, and that's something that you're right, the video does show off. For context, if you somehow haven't seen the video, Prost is leading, Senna's in second. Senna goes if-gap car, Prost closes the door. They very, very embarrassingly both park their cars on the escape road, waving their arms at each other. Prost gets out, retires. The marshals push Senna through the escape road. He goes on to finish the race and then gets disqualified, thus handing Prost the trophy. It was like the last thing that they did of any interest at McLaren for Prost because he left because he didn't like Senna. He didn't like being around Senna. Does the Damon Hill law apply here? The idea that Senna was behind Prost in the championship, needed to win the championship, and I guess it doesn't, because crashing Prost out and himself out meant that Prost would win anyway. So I suppose I'm answering my own question when I say it probably wouldn't have applied.
Yeah, and I don't think even if he believed, or even if the thinking was he would get away with that in terms of without damaging himself, I just don't think that was the thinking at the time. Like, we know Ayrton Senna is not above crashing out people intentionally. I am not going to go over Suzuka to 1990, but yeah, that pretty much shows you that the guy was perfectly willing to kill a man if it's needed. But this time, I just think he figured if he did the we pass or crash thing, Prost would at the very least give him just enough room for him to back out, but Prost didn't, and well, so again, I don't think there was any malicious intent on Senna's part there, outside of the general philosophy of let me pass or we crash, which, again, if we count that as malice, then yeah, Ayrton Senna was a malicious person to the very core, so, but yeah.
Yeah, I must say, maybe I'm cynical, but I count that as malice. Senna wanted the lead. He knew the only way he was going to win the championship was if he had to do anything to win the championship, and so he took them both out. I think it was, for the record, I think it was a racing incident. I don't think either was particularly at fault, but Senna, of course, instigated it by making the Banzai move in the first place. I think it's the same thing that I just mentioned about Rosberg and Hamilton, and especially Verstappen and Hamilton. It's like, at some point, the cars are just going to gravitate toward each other. One of them has to win the championship, and they're just going to hit each other out. Monza 2021 is a perfect example of where it's just like, it was bound to happen sooner or later, because whoever's behind in the championship is just going to do anything they can to win it, including taking their opponent out, because they don't either have any consequences or they don't see any. Yeah, that's my opinion. It's not the narrative, but like, that's how I kind of see it. And so I gave this the least consequential award, because I think something that, for further context, people maybe don't know is that Senna crashed himself out the lead of the Australian Grand Prix 2 weeks later, which meant that it didn't really matter in the end, because he wouldn't have got the points anyway to overtake Prost. Maybe in a different scenario he might have been more desperate to do so. He may have pulled out all of the stops, but at the end of the day, no matter what you argue about, Prost would have won the championship anyway the following 2 weeks later. So
yeah, in terms of my star rating, this is very similar to the Fittipaldi incident in that it kind of transcends the rating scale just because of the historical significance of the fact that, again, it's one of the most talked about crashes in Formula One history. But I am actually going to, quote unquote, only give it 4 out of 5 stars, because you asked me earlier when a teammate collision is necessary, and I'm not saying this one was necessary, but this is about as close to necessary as you can get, in the sense that it is the second to last race of the championship. The title is on the line. If Senna doesn't get by Prost, it's over. And yeah, that is pretty much as close to a necessary collision as you can get. So yeah, in terms of since that is one of the factors affecting the star ratings, I knocked off a star just because, again, when Senna wasn't going to go for it now, when was he ever going to? So yeah, this was the period to put all the chips on the table. Senna lost, and that's that. So 4 out of 5 stars.
And FOM of 1 again, because we started talking about Senna and Prost, and we didn't stop for 10 minutes. So let's move swiftly on. Our next crash is between 2 BARs at the, if I'm not mistaken, it was the Hockenheimring, the German Grand Prix of 2000, between Ricardo Zonta and Jacques Villeneuve. Maybe, do you want to give this one a
Well, as we all know, the 2000 German Grand Prix was a very wet affair with mixing conditions, both in the infield and the forest section. And that left drivers scrambling, but in that particular incident it was Ricardo Zonta who tried to make a move, kinda-ish, into turn 1, and clipped Villeneuve on the rear end, and that somewhat clumsy touch resulted in Villeneuve doing a very fancy pirouette. I think it was 720 degrees, or was it even 90?
It was at least 2 full spins. It may have even been 3.
That would be 980, isn't it? Yeah.
1080.
Yes. Stupid math.
Didn't you play snowboarding games?
Well, at the very least, not in a very long time. Let's put it that way. Yeah, I mean, what is there to say? Zonta didn't need to make the contact. It happened. It's not very good. I don't know whether they were already fighting for points paying positions or whether they were just really close to them. I don't have the exact context in mind. It's been a while since I watched that race, but they were close to it.
So the context is it had been raining earlier on in the race, which is when the famous man came out, the disgruntled Mercedes employee, quote unquote, came out in his rain jacket and brought out the safety car. And then when the race was drying up, it started raining again. There was a bunch of scrabbling for the pits, and if I'm not mistaken, Zonta did not pit. Villeneuve did, so Zonta was going quicker because he clipped Villeneuve out basically. Or no, that was it. It was Villeneuve was catching Zonta and clipped himself out because Villeneuve was the one behind. So it was. I think it was more like conditions than anything else because Zonta also crashed out himself literally a lap later because he was on the wrong tires. So I think it was just one of those things. And the most interesting thing about it, and the reason why it was shown on the F1 video, is because of that 720 or 1080 spin by Villeneuve. So I give it my most stylish award.
Very fancy. And in terms of rating, well, classic straight up the middle, 3 out of 5 stars, as you said. In itself, nothing memorable outside of the very pretty spin. And the effort by Villeneuve to keep the engine going, which Murray Walker pointed out. So, yeah, 3 out of 5. Nothing to write home about, but also nothing lame or particularly cringeworthy either. So, it just happens.
Yep, that's about it. Our next crash is between Sebastian Vettel, who I think this is the first time we're mentioning him, and Charles Leclerc in the no, it won't be the last of Charles Leclerc at the Brazilian Grand Prix of 2019. Wait, before I say this, one interesting thing about also the 89 Japanese Grand Prix was it was the first win for Nannini at the same time that the Spanish Grand Prix of 2016, which was also a crash out of the lead, was the first Max Verstappen win. I wonder if there's a recurring theme here, any first-time winners which happen to come about by this kind of thing. Because also Zonta and Villeneuve had Rubens Barrichello winning his first race at the German Grand Prix that year. Yeah, seeing a pattern here for me.
So of course the real pattern I see is that if not for his tragically career short-cutting incident, Nannini clearly would have been a multiple times world champion who would have absolutely dominated in the 90s.
Are you okay over there, Lennart?
Well, I'm going to let the listeners decide on that one.
It didn't sound like you were saying that with very much conviction. Sorry.
Well, if Mr. Nannini is listening to us, I 100% believe what I said, and I'm sorry for your loss, I guess. Is he still alive?
Yes,
That's
he's
good.
Still alive. So moving swiftly on, we're talking about the Brazilian Grand Prix of 2019, which was a weird race in and of itself. But I'm going to start off by giving my award. I call it the Princess and the Pea Award, because I couldn't think of a better metaphor. There must be a better one. But the story, the fable, I think it's Hans Christian Andersen of the Princess and the Pea, is that there was they put a pea under 100 comfy mattresses, and the princess lay down in the mattress and could still feel it. Sometimes cars retire from Formula One races, and you're just absolutely bamboozled. It's like, how was that a retirement cause? So, Sebastian Vettel and Charles Leclerc were swapping positions, going down the main straight after the start-finish straight, after the right-left. That straight, They were swapping positions, and they had the merest of touches. It was a tiny collision, and both drivers got a puncture, if I'm not mistaken, and both of them immediately DNF'd. It's like, you know, you have a friend, and they're having a bad day, and they're sort of, you say something, and you've said the wrong thing, and they get worked up about it, and they kind of fall apart mentally, and it's just like, the 2019 Ferrari felt like that, where it's just like the teeniest tiny collision, and the whole, like, the both drivers were tired, and Sebastian Vettel was on the team radio going, "My God, muss das sein?" And it's like, you could just feel all this emotion coming out of the garage and out of the team radio.
Yeah, I'm getting kind of flashbacks to one of my ex-girlfriends here, so. No, yeah, it's, again, that is also something where we kind of forget just how fast these cars are going, in particular the 2019 versions. And the thing is, this is an accident I personally would have very two different viewpoints on, depending on which position I actually have. As a racing steward, this is run-of-the-mill racing accident. Yeah, don't even bother getting both of those guys in to talk about them. Just tell Ferrari to send me over the telemetry, and yeah, okay, looks good, racing accident, piss off. The thing is, though, as a team boss, I would be absolutely livid. The "Mein Gott, muss das sein" is actually almost word for word how I would talk to both of the drivers afterwards. This was irrelevant. The 2019 season was pretty much over at this point. Hamilton had locked up his championship. I don't even know where he locked up, but it must have been ages ago. This wasn't like 2017 or 18 where there was an actual championship battle. We were just fighting for points with Red Bull. I don't even know where the constructors' standings were at. And yeah, this was completely and utterly unnecessary. This is where it doesn't even really matter who is at fault. You are teammates, you shouldn't be that close to each other, so what are you goofs doing? So, yeah. And that is why I rated a 4 out of 5. It is obviously, because it's a more recent one, still very much ingrained in the collective memory. The team radio is in itself a meme. And again, it's completely unnecessary. They were fighting for, what was it, P4, P5? I don't know, I don't care. So
yeah, it doesn't matter.
It's just,
it's like, it's
why are you doing this?
It's so
tragic.
tragic.
Muss das sein?
It's so tragic, because it's like they're nothing. Obviously, neither driver meant to do it. It was just a tragic accident. But when you consider it in the context of just like both of them, especially Vettel, were so frustrated all the time. Like, you could just see this vein on the side of his forehead, you know, just like throbbing as the year went by, and it's like, oh God, when that happened, you could just hear this emotional release, and maybe it had to happen, you know. Maybe it didn't have to happen, but it's kind of funny.
Yeah, let me see my guess.
I give it the Princess and the P award, but that's more for the Ferrari car itself than for the drivers. Gosh, that must be one of the most embarrassing crashes of the last 5 years.
If you had a define unnecessary teammate collision, yeah, that's the one. Anyway, speaking of teammate collisions that are, I don't know where I was going with this, but the thing is, that kind of ties into whom we are actually going to talk about, because we're going to talk about the reject team no one remembers, Midland.
Yes, the most interesting and exciting team of the most interesting, exciting new team. No, the second most interesting and exciting new team of 2006.
The franchise values would be off the chart if they tried it today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like a proven name with two proven drivers. We had Christian Albers, who got a famous 5th place at the USA Grand Prix, which would actually end up being his only points. So Christian Albers is actually a reject. And Thiago Monteiro, who famously got one of his only 2 points finishing positions at the same race when he finished on the podium. So between them, both drivers throughout their entire career had 1 points finish on merit. But this is Monteiro's fault. This brings into a wider how should I say, more of a, like a wider talk about Tiago Monteiro. He was lauded pretty heavily for his consistency. He was a semi-decent qualifier, a pretty decent racer, and he always got the car to the finish. He was usually in the just outside the points or so, and he was usually threatening to get in there on the kind of race where he would be able to. And he actually had the record until Max Chilton beat it for most finished races from your debut race. No longer stands because Chilton stole it, but Tiago Monteiro was very reliable in 2005. But in 2006, he decided that he had used up all of his talent and crashed quite a lot, actually. He was very unreliable the following year, and when he hit the back of Albers, it's probably the most famous thing he did in his career outside of obviously the Indianapolis podium.
Well, at the very least, his Formula 1
So I
career.
gave this... yeah, it's almost those two things almost sum the entire career up in terms of the only two things of note he did. But so I gave it the "You Had One Job" award, which is that all you had to do was be reliable and at least try to finish the races, and you couldn't even do that.
Yeah, I have very little to add to that. He himself admitted that he made a mistake on that one in the press conference for the next race. Then, if there was any sort of attempt to make anything positive happen, it is very much not obvious. So the crash itself isn't particularly memorable either. So yeah, that's a 1 out of 5 stars. Sorry, just like Midland itself, completely forgettable.
Yeah. Our next 2 crashes are actually part and parcel of the same crash.
Yes, we're talking about the 2000 Prost and its drivers, veteran John Alesi and not veteran Nick Heidfeld. The thing is, they had the blessing from our standpoint and misfortune from theirs to crash into each other in back-to-back races at the French and Austrian Grand Prix of 2000.
Yeah, there's a certain satisfaction to these crashes. Not for Alain Prost, obviously, because he just like you can see him with his head in his hands throughout the entire throughout both incidents. But the first one is purely on Heidfeld. They were at the hairpin corner at Magny-Cours. Heidfeld went in, locked his tires up, and smashed into Alesi. As far as I'm aware, they had a bit of a bust up after the race. As far as I'm aware, Alesi didn't take it very well, which makes it twice as funny that Alesi drove into Heidfeld and had an even worse collision the following race at the Österreich ring, or the A1 ring, and knocked them both out of the race and into the gravel. Yeah, I guess, should we talk about these two? Do you want to rate them separately? I don't really have a huge amount to talk about because they kind of, as I say, they kind of wrap themselves up in a neat little
No, I
package.
don't really have much to say as about separate incidents. Though I can, obviously the video we talked about made the rounds in the GP Rejects Discord as well. So, and obviously, if you are listening and haven't been yet become a part of that very elusive community, do feel free to join the GP Rejects Discord. We are a very interesting bunch and would love to hear from you, or read from you to be precise. Anyway, the video made the rounds and there came up this, well, I don't want to call it a conspiracy theory, but more an assumption that Alesi running into Heidfeld at Austria was some sort of vengeance for the incidents at Magny-Cours.
Who does that? Who would do that for like, I'll take you out because you took me out when we were fighting for P12 last race.
Yeah,
Well, I'll take you out when we're fighting for P12 this race. That'll show you.
The thing is, as Jeremy pointed out, it's a very amusing theory at best. Outside of Hamlin's races, there's also the simple fact that I have watched the entirety of the 2000 Austrian Grand Prix for the gravel trap I did about that one, was it 3 months ago? And I watched John Alesi during that race because the gravel trap focused on the battle between Prost and Minardi and how it was displayed by the camera crews at the time. And John Alesi did not have the kind of day where he was genuinely able to think of and execute such a ruthless revenge attack because he was struggling with the Prost all day, which again wasn't a particularly good car. We also have an article on Prost's mishap in 2000, and we're going to link it in the description. But yeah, Alesi was way too busy with not being old, not being slow, and not being beaten by Heidfeld to really think of it in this grand revenge scheme, and not just in the, okay, gotta try to pass him because he's making me look as old as I am, and yeah. But yeah,
Yeah, I don't know.
Do you have an award for this complex of crashes?
No, I have no. I guess I would say most satisfactory award, because it's like, because they took each other out. Everyone's happy. Everybody loses, so everybody wins in the same way. Our next.
For the record,
crash,
I gave them a
wouldn't say
4
is
out
so
of 5
satisfying.
because, as you said,
Sorry.
very neat package, very unnecessary, very much helping Minardi. So 4 out of 5 stars. So on to the next one.
Yeah, sorry.
No problem.
Sorry for moving swiftly on. Our next one is the crash between Daniel Ricciardo and Max Verstappen at the 2018 Baku Azerbaijan Grand Prix when they were teammates. This one is less funny and more just sad, because it reminds me of very early 90s. If you ever watched 1990 or 1991, after Prost left McLaren and Senna was basically given free rein to win 2 championships in a row. The most astonishing thing from watching those races is just how many races the other teams just basically give to Senna. Like, the Williams team would be leading in a 1-2, and both cars would just like, they just blew up and Senna won the race, and it's like, come on, like, give him a fight. And when I watch now in retrospect, now that it's been about 5 years, I rewatched the Ricciardo Verstappen crash. I'm like, this isn't like exciting. This is just sad. Like, put a fight to Hamilton and stop acting like idiots and taking each other out. Like, there was no. I think there was a little bit of drama because Ricciardo was a bit upset that he wasn't anymore the number 1 golden boy, and that all the resources were being put to Verstappen. It's the same thing that happens so often in these kind of teams, like the old McLaren or the current Red Bull, whereby one driver is favored and the other driver just has to like it or lump it. And I think this was Ricciardo's fault. I'm not saying he gets away with it because of the internal sympathy that I have for him or anything like that. It was his fault. But at the same time, it's like, now that time has healed that wound, and we know that Ricciardo was very good but just not in the right mental state, it's now just like, I wish they'd spent less time bickering with each other and crashing into each other and more time actually putting up a fight. So I give this my Put Up a Fight award.
Yeah, as far as 2018 in particular is concerned, it is a very well worn-out story that Mercedes' opposition did a very good job at taking themselves out of contention. We don't even want to talk about all these screw-ups Ferrari had that year. And yeah, there is no real debate about who's at fault here. I said it before, rear-ending is always, at the very least, a fault of the driver who does the rear-ending, and in this case I would even say it's fully his fault. So yeah, there's not much to say about it. Ricciardo was not good at that one, and it's sort of like the Leclerc-Vettel incident, but it isn't quite as... It doesn't have quite the 4 or 5 stars thing going on, because in the end there is someone who is clearly at fault, but it's one of those situations in particular, given as Baku's main straight is a very long one, as we know, and so it's a misjudgment that is much easier to make, and it's much less... It's not quite as easy to say as it was for Vettel and Leclerc to just stay away from each other. Why are you two so close? Because Ricciardo had a slipstream, and when you're a slipstream, you're automatically getting close to whoever's in front of you. So that's just a law of physics. So yeah, avoidable, but also not, by far not the worst on this list. So for me, it's a solid 3 out of 5 stars.
Yeah. Not seismic, because they weren't fighting for a championship and they never ended up fighting against each other for a championship. So it's more just, as I say, it's more just sad. But yeah, I don't really have anything more to say about that. It'll be interesting, again, dating this podcast a little bit, in the summer of 2023 when Ricciardo has had a 6-month absence from Formula One, is now back driving for AlphaTauri. If the miracle happens and he somehow ends up being in a Red Bull in 2024, then it would be interesting to see how this goes back again when Ricciardo is suddenly in a championship capable car. But let's leave that for.
So obviously we have to remember that if he gets back to Red Bull, it will be as a number 2 driver this time outright.
Yeah. But it would be fun if there was
Oh,
some drama.
for sure.
The biggest rivalry since Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg.
If it happens again at Baku, it would be the funniest event of 2024. I don't even need to see what happens the rest of that season.
Our next video is between Takuma Sato and Giancarlo Fisichella, who have actually not been mentioned at all this podcast so far. Their crash at the Malaysian Grand Prix of 2002, which was so iconic, it's actually the cover image of this podcast.
Huh. Well, I didn't know that, but obviously it's a very funny thing to notice. And I didn't think of that at all. So that's why I was a bit dumbfounded. So, oh, yeah, that was a thing. Jeopardy music. Jeopardy music in the brain. Yeah. Anyway, for context, it is relatively early in the 2002 Malaysian Grand Prix, and Jordan are not having a good year so far, and it would not get much better. And during was it the first turns of Malaysia, or was it a different complex in the middle of the lap?
Yeah, it was the opening set of corners, like the not snail.
There, Takuma Sato got a bit too eager and just ended up rear-ending Fisichella and completely wiping out the rear wing of the Italian. So, pretty not good for the young Japanese driver.
I don't have a huge amount to say about this. I don't have an award for it. It's more just in the... It's hard to find video footage of it and how it happened and why it happened and the context and things. So I don't have a huge amount of commentary for this one, other than that it's our cover image. And so that's probably about the most noteworthy thing I can think of it at this time. But yeah.
Well, according to James Allen, or was it Matt Brundle? I don't care. It also happened on St. Patrick's Day. I would need to confirm this, but I can't be bothered. Sorry to our Irish American listeners. And yeah, I guess if it's true, then that's about the only thing really making this teammate collision particularly noteworthy. But outside of that, whatever happens to be added in unnecessariness, making up words here, is made up by the fact that the incident itself is not particularly memorable either. So again, we're ending up with a clean 3 out of 5.
Yep. I've got nothing more to say about that. Our next one is between Juan Pablo Montoya and Ralf Schumacher. I will say some spoilers beforehand that there are more than one of these, but they're not thematically connected, so we'll just do them separately. But the first one we're going to discuss is the German Grand Prix of 2004. It was first lap, first turn on the big right hand, if you know the big right hand hairpin at turn 1 at the Nürburgring. So Montoya did the exact same thing that many others did, which is he locked up his tires going into the corner, and it just so happened to be that the one person who he actually did hit, trying to get around the corner, was Ralf Schumacher, his teammate. He did just hit him, but then after he did hit him, the laws of physics meant that Ralph's car slid and spun to the right, thus smashing Montoya's car and knocking off his own front wing. So it was like a double, triple calamity hit where the cars just almost magnetized to each other. Firmly Montoya's fault, ruined both of their races, and it was it was midway through 2004, which was the last season that they were teammates.
And if you ask both of them, they would probably say it was about damn time.
Yeah, it's funny because I think Williams did pretty well, and I don't think Montoya or Ralf Schumacher were particularly like malicious or grumpy or like negative people, but I think like 2004 was not a glorious year for Williams. They really struggled. They had their was it the bullnose car, where they were the only team who did this different design to all the other teams, and much like 10 years later with Lotus, it didn't work, and they were fighting for mid points table the whole season, and them taking each other out was, they probably enjoyed the fact that they could just go home early. So I gave this the Can I Go Now award for out of sympathy for both Schumacher and Montoya, who both went on to better things. Ralf Schumacher went on to a better paycheck, and Montoya went on to NASCAR.
What else is there to say? Really summarized the situation perfectly. Montoya and Ralph were a good driver pairing for Williams to have, but by 2004 they both very much had ran their course. In particular, Ralph is not someone who is generally very good at getting along with teammates. He, in his... What was that podcast called again? Beyond the Grid? What's the Formula 1 podcast called? It doesn't matter.
Beyond the Grid. Yeah.
In that episode, he more or less stated his belief that teammates can never be friends, and let's just say Ralph was not above acting like that. And so, yeah, it was just not a very good year for Williams, accented by this very avoidable early race crash. But again, just because the season for Williams was so mediocre, it didn't really matter. One could make a point that, yeah, Ralph shouldn't have been taken out of his home race, and given as he very soon have the incident at Indianapolis, it would have been nice for him to have something good for him at his home race, at one of his home races, in fact. The only one he would have that year. And, yeah, but what can I say? It's, again, a classic 3 out of 5. Which is now the third time in a row I have given that rating, so, yeah.
Yeah. Not much to say. Now that time is healed, it's less, again, it's like, there's a difference between these ones where they're fighting for middle points, potentially, or fighting for the lead, and it's also kind of like, in the actions themselves, like, Montoya is more likely to do a banzai move because he's apathetic and is just like, alright, let's just go for it, kind of thing, rather than because he's desperately trying to fight for a win or anything like that. Like, I think they would have been, ironically, I think they would have been more sensible had they been fighting for the lead. But that's just the way it is. Our next one is Jenson Button and Lewis Hamilton again, at the Canadian Grand Prix of 2011.
Yeah.
This one is interesting. I have quite a bit to say, but maybe you can go first. I've been introducing
I
these
think
crashes.
I can take my turn again. And the story of this one is, again, pretty simple. It's Canada, it's wet, and Lewis Hamilton has a very good run out of the final chicane. Has the speed advantage, tries to pass Jenson Button down the inside. Button cuts him off. Hamilton ends up out. Button ends up damaged. So, yeah, this one is actually pretty difficult to judge from a stewarding perspective because it is rather unclear how much Button can actually see in these conditions. Like, the spray itself on the video doesn't look particularly bad. But again, it's something different to look something from the helicopter cam and something completely different to look inside the cockpit. So that would pretty much more or less decide my judgment on whether that is worthy of a penalty or not, both as a racing steward and as a team boss. So it's very hard for me to judge Button, unlike normally. But the thing is, yeah, this was just a very complex one, very hard to judge, for me at least. And those, I'm going to take my rating away. It was a 2 out of 5. It's not the most memorable part, not of that race itself, and not of the McLaren story. It's one of those things that tends to be forgotten, that for all the bluster of, Jenson Button came back from last place, from P24 or whatever it was at the time.
P22, I think.
Yeah, 22, and it's sort of forgotten by history that it was his own damn fault for being there in the first place. So that is personally also why I don't have that as Button's greatest drive, unlike most people. But yeah, I don't have much more to say about it, so floor's yours.
Strong disagree. Just about everything you said. I think it's clearly just a racing incident. I think it's, and if it's anyone's fault, it's Hamilton's. But I don't think anyone. I don't. Okay, I'm going to say full on racing incident. No one is at fault. The problem is it was very rainy. Spray was everywhere, and also it wasn't just that Button didn't see Hamilton. I think Hamilton also didn't see Button. I think Hamilton was going if-gap car into the inside, and he wouldn't have done that had he seen that that there wasn't any room, because there wasn't any room basically when Hamilton was going for there in the first place. I think the difference between watching it now and then watching it, like, what's been interesting about watching these videos is watching them now in like an isolated context, because I remember watching it as it happened on the TV. And at that time, it was, 4 hours? It was like constant rain, delays, safety car, restarts, yada, 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 yada. Like, it was a really tense and crazy evening. Well, it was evening for me. And that high tension meant that the reporters basically were, like Martin Brundle, were, oh my God, this is the biggest thing that's happening in the world, yada, yada. Whereas now we watch it,
Okay.
to me, it's just cut and dry. It's like, Hamilton didn't see Button. They crashed. He went out. That's it. Like, it's just an incident. It's a racing incident, and it happens when it's wet. It's bad luck that they were teammates, but I don't see either of them particularly at fault. It was raining and they didn't see each other, and they both misjudged the line. Okay. So I would give this the cut and dry award, or the cut and wet award, as I've written down here. Fascinating seeing it from a neutral perspective now, a bit like 10 or 12 years onwards. So I don't know, what would you give this as a rating out of interest? Because this was a potentially a crash for the win.
Well, I don't recall they were near the front at that time, but I don't have the exact order in mind at the time. So if I recall, weren't they just like 4th, 5th or something? Because I really recall Vettel leading this race for the most part. Or is my memory fault of that one?
I mean, I don't mean for the at the time. I mean just in general, because of the race was so crazy that in hindsight, Hamilton could easily have won just as much as Button had
The
done.
thing is, I think outside of the Coulthard and Häkkinen crash at Austria, I don't think I rated really any of those crashes based on the hindsight of the race as a whole. But in the end, perhaps it's also one of the factors that probably played into that, as an accident itself is just, well, not really worth writing home about either. As you said, it pretty much is more or less a straight up racing incident in the wet conditions. Again, that kind of stuff happens more often than not in a rain race. So, yeah, perhaps I just don't see the specialness in it. And also, I kind of was struggling because I was handing out 3 out of 5 in a row, and I didn't want to stick the same all the time. So, if
Well, there is
So if
average.
you-
By its definition, there should be more of those than anything
So
else.
if you want, you are, as in the listener, if you want, you are free to bump it to the 3 out of 5 as well. But yeah, I just don't mark it
Yep. It's much
as
yeah,
particularly special.
I agree. It's much less interesting, like 10 years on. Our next one is Ralf Schumacher, where we heard that name before, and a different teammate, Giancarlo Fisichella, at the wonderfully titled Luxembourg Grand Prix of 1997.
Which was just the Nürburgring, except in fancy Luxembourg colors, which aren't actually that fancy.
Oh, this is back in the day when we had 2 German Grand Prix and 2 Italian Grand Prix, but of course, officially there can only be one name.
And 2
race with
Spanish
that
Grand Prix,
country.
which is why Luxembourg wasn't the European Grand Prix, because that one was taken by Jerez.
That's true. Yeah, that's true, because Jerez was... So we had 17 races, and 6 of them were in 3 countries. Interesting. 17 races in, what, 15?
14 countries,
14
yes.
countries.
Anyway, onto the accident itself. It's the first lap. And back then, before the 2003 rebuild, the first corner of the Nürburgring was a lot tighter in terms of both track width and the curvature. So, yeah. There were 3 cars trying to go through a spot where there was only room for 2, and I don't even know who had the inside line, which is the one where I'd say a bit more at fault, but honestly, emphasis on a bit. The really the only interesting part about this Grand Prix accident is who got involved in that collision, or more precisely, who got his race hurt by the 2 Johns taking each other out. And that is none other than World Championship contender and brother of one of the parties involved, Michael Schumacher.
Yeah, that was the main point I was going to make as well. So basically, it was, in my opinion, it was Ralf Schumacher's fault. He was going for the line quite aggressively. He pushed Fisichella slightly to the right. Fisichella basically had to go off track, and of course then Schumacher does the very noble thing and then puts his car right back onto the middle of the track ahead of where Fisichella would be. And what can Fisichella do? Hit the back of Schumacher. So yeah, it was kind of Schumacher pushed him off and then got taken out as his just desserts for that. It was Schumacher's fault. Yeah, first lap it happens. And as a result, they both piled straight into Michael Schumacher, who was fighting for the championship. Schumacher crashed out. He obviously in that scenario he could have been in the midpoints. He could have got a podium or something. Who knows? But it allowed Jacques Villeneuve to win very easily, and as a result, well, indirectly that cost Michael Schumacher the championship. So I gave this the awkward Christmas dinner award, because that Christmas dinner with Michael and Ralph and their parents and the rest of the family all together must have been a wonderful conversation. How was your year? How did you do in the Formula One this year? Well, Mom, Ralph hit me, etc., etc.
And the worst thing is, Michael famously allowed Ralph to take a point in France by not lapping him. So, shows you how much doing things for your little brother helps, yeah? So, me, I am a little brother, so...
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little brother as well, so...
Yeah, we know what we are like. And of course...
Fraternal collision.
It should be noted that this was not the first Ralph and Fisichella incident of 1997 either. There was the lovely clash in Argentina, where Ralph ended up running into Fisichella, taking the latter out, and perhaps hurting the chances of Ralph to do even better than third, the podium he got at that race. But that's neither here nor there, and honestly, it just shows that Eddie Jordan's man management at the time left a lot to be desired.
Yeah,
And-
say that again. Yeah, he wasn't famous for his driver.
And-
he wasn't famous for supporting it emotionally or logistically his drivers.
Yeah, and I gave that crash a 4 out of 5, and if I'm being honest, I don't remember why. It's like,
I guess
it was,
yeah, more for consequences.
yeah, again, pretty much. It's first lap, which generally gets a more generous score in terms of being unnecessary, and of course it took a championship contender with them, so I guess that's the part. So yeah, I'm just going to stay with 4 out of 5. I was thinking something when I wrote the rating down, so 4 stars for the Schumacher brothers and Fisichella.
Our next crash has the driver which I think we've spoken about before, Ralf Schumacher, funnily enough, again. And we're bringing back his old buddy, Juan Pablo Montoya. I'm just scrolling down the list right now. Yes, our final mention of Ralf Schumacher this evening, and his crash with Juan Pablo Montoya at the Indianapolis Grand Prix in 2002. This is a funny one. Again, a bit satisfactory to watch, because Montoya took out Schumacher pretty fair and square in the Nürburgring 2 years later, but 2 years previously at Indianapolis it was Schumacher who was at fault. Ralph, who tried to basically, Montoya had overtaken him on the start straight going into the second lap. Ralf Schumacher had tried to hold his position, tried to take the inside line into the right-hander, and then spun himself around because he overjudged the corner, and then slammed his rear into the back of Montoya. Actually, not too dissimilar to the way that I think Hamilton and Rosberg crashed in Spanish Grand Prix 2016. Similar kind of setup whereby the one had kind of flipped themselves around and hit the other driver, not with the front of their car, but with the back of their car, because they'd lost full control.
Yeah, the only real difference between those two concepts is the fact that in Spain you can think maybe of a reason that Rosberg was at fault because of the slower speed he had out of the corner. and he pushed Hamilton to a certain side. Whereas in this one, Montoya made a clean pass. Schumacher didn't want to yield. Schumacher spun. Schumacher clipped Montoya's rear end. Clumsy Ralph. That's, yeah, pretty silly, pretty avoidable. Yeah, Ralph, you can do better. We both know you can do better. But on that day he didn't, and yeah, his fault. Clearly, no discussion, no room for alternate opinions. If you don't think it's his fault, you are wrong.
One thing I find quite funny about watching some of those old replays, because they're so quick back to back, is that do you ever see the Blues Brothers where they get out the car at the very end of the film and the car just literally falls to pieces? It reminds me. Some of these videos remind me of that, where it's like the rear wings, especially on those old cars, are almost begging to be set free. Like the slightest touch in the rear wing would just fly up into the air. Like they really weren't solidly bolted onto the car. If you imagine also with like Kimi Räikkönen's crash, I think it was at the Hockenheim in the 2003. It was Räikkönen maybe at 2005, but when his rear wing falls off, almost like his DRS flap flying off, to use like a modern parlance.
I think
it's
that was
quite funny watching these
2004, but it doesn't matter.
Okay, but it's like it's some watching some of these early 2000s crashes, like their cars were really were made of carbon fiber, like through and through. The slightest touch, they would just disintegrate and pieces would fall off.
Yeah, and as far as this incident is concerned, and as far as rating it is concerned, well, it was pretty unnecessary. Only one driver was really at fault. It's very much similar to the Montero-Albers collision, except it would be knocked up a star or it would be given a star actually, for Ralph's active negative behavior in that, whereas Montero just made a outright mistake, whereas Ralph could have avoided that if he had yielded. But that star is then taken away because this one is particular in one aspect. For most of the races we talked about, and we're going to talk about, the respective teammate collision was the biggest nonsense done by teammates that particular race. That is not true for the 2002 United States Grand Prix.
And what happened at the United States Grand Prix in 2002?
Compared to the baffling way Ferrari accidentally handed Rubens Barrichello a win, that accident between the two Williams is... Nobody remembers that one. When I say the word 2002 United States Grand Prix, no one is thinking of that crash. And so the start gained by Ralph's unwillingness to do what is right for the team is then taken away because, again, it's a nothing burger. So it ended up with a very ruthless 1 out of 5 stars.
Ouch. Our next crash, we mentioned earlier on that the 1993 Italian Grand Prix had 2 teammate collisions in it.
Oh boy. And
I would say both of them probably had the most dangerous collisions in them. Although it's easy to joke about the Christian Fittipaldi flip because we know he's fine and he was absolutely okay, but like that's the kind of crash that he could easily have been heavily injured from. Probably the only one scarier and more dangerous on this list is our next one, which is during qualifying, I think it was, or practice.
Qualifying, Saturday. Qualifying, to be precise. This needs to be clarified. This was 2-day qualifying back then. Remember that one.
And it was Jean Alesi and Gerhard Berger. Jean Alesi, they were going into the... what is it called? Is that the Ascari chicane?
That's Ascari,
I never remember that. Yeah, the big sort of left to the right curve before you go onto the main straight towards the Parabolica. Alesi held the middle line for some reason, tried to hold his line there, and Berger was coming in super quickly, ducked to the left in fright, completely spun himself off and crashed full speed into the barrier.
I'm shaking my head as you describing it. I swear, I could go on about this for hours. Like,
yeah,
it is the end of qualifying. Why would you do that? Oh my god!
I don't find it like a funny crash, and I almost don't care too much about how much Alesi was to blame for it. It's more just like, geez, is he okay? Because like when you watch that, it's still, even though you watch it on replay, like it's a scary crash, and the fact that Berger got back, and I think he even raced in the actual Grand Prix itself. Like
he was a very stubborn man in the best way possible.
Oh, let's not forget that he almost died in Italy like 4 years earlier at Imola when his car caught fire. Like it's.
He was very hard to kill, so to speak. I guess that is something you generally find in Austrians. I guess you have to be if you live on very high mountain ranges. They tend to be very tough people, let's put it that way, in terms of survivability. But there's one thing where I cannot agree with you first off, I obviously agree that the first concern is Gerhard okay, or is the driver in general okay if you have something like that happening. But the thing that Alesi is not at fault, not that much mattering to me, that is something where I would completely go the other way, right? If I had been John Todd at that moment in time, you would have had to help me back. And I don't mean that in the sense of I'm going to kick Alesi's ass, though I would have probably done that as well, but in the sense of I'm going to fire him on the spot. Like, what in the name of the racing gods was he thinking? It's oh my god. I cannot get over this. This is so ridiculous. This is spatial awareness of a sack of frog spawn.
Imagine him and Lance Stroll on the same piece of tarmac.
Oh dear, dear.
Yeah. Should we move on?
I guess we should, but obviously
otherwise we may just let that stew for a while. I think we should move on.
The rating is obviously a 5 out of 5 because this is how you very much don't handle your teammate. This is the how not to prime example. Okay, on to the next one, which is familiar faces. 2 familiar faces even. Mark Webber and Sebastian Vettel, who had themselves a very lovely teammate collision at the 2010 Turkish Grand Prix.
Actually, their only collision, as far as I remember. I don't think they ever actually, although they had lots of messing around and silly buggers, I don't think that was the only actual collision they had.
Yeah, they had a couple of very close calls like Brazil 2012, but I don't think they ever actually ran into each other after that one.
Yeah, of course the previous time they did it was in when Vettel was at Toro Rosso in this Fuji 2007. This one is a bit... Okay, well I guess I can start with my award. I gave this one the Worst Optics Award because... Is it like accepted that it's Vettel's fault, or whose fault do you think it is?
I would go with Vettel in a 70-30 split. Like, one could argue that Webber perhaps could have let a bit more room, but honestly, who even cares? Like,
okay,
again, I'll give it 70-30, 80-20, whatever you want. It's Vettel's fault majority. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. Because like even when I say I think it's Vettel's fault, I don't mean 100% Vettel's fault. Like as you say, it takes 2 to tango. But I think this is the worst optics of any of the races, of any of these crashes, because first of all, Vettel took no responsibility for the crash. Second of all, 10, 15, whatever minutes later, when Vettel has gone out, he has jumped on the scooter and they've driven him back to the paddock, they've driven back to the pit wall. What happens when he goes back to the paddock? He goes to see Christian Horner, Adrian Newey, and all those people on the wall, and they're all hugging and kissing. Oh, poor, it's the Gordon Ramsay thing, isn't it? It's oh, bless, poor Vettel. What a shame that you crashed out. Oh, damn, poor thing. And it's like, wait. People were saying pretty strongly that like Red Bull will favor Vettel at any cost, even when he's actually the problem. And it wasn't the only crash which Vettel caused that year. And it's like, Red Bull as a team need to portray themselves as being putting the team first and putting the championship first, and obviously not, how should I say, condoning crashes of that kind. And yada yada yada, showing their true colors, yada yada yada. Like the crash is pretty damning, I think, of Horner and co, because it's like they firmly didn't at all punish Vettel for the incident, which he had completely caused, and lost the team maybe even they lost them a 1-2 and made it a 3 retirement, which, if I'm not mistaken off the top of my head, is 28 points that they lost. So yeah, firmly Vettel's fault, and the most important thing for me is actually how Red Bull handled it, which is they didn't, which is why Webber got really, really pissed at the British Grand Prix and other instances throughout the year. And
that British Grand Prix was not bad for a number 2 driver. Anyway,
yeah.
So that also had something to do with the parts they were giving him for that particular race, but that's not a story we want to go into right now. The thing is, and I'm going to start off by giving it my rating, which is a 5 out of 5 again. And I'm going to go into a bit of detail why, because most of what Jeremy said is more or less my point exactly. Compared to most other crashes on this list, the ramifications for that race in particular were very emphatic. Like, take for example the Häkkinen-Coulthard collision from earlier. Yes, obviously when your drivers take themselves out 1-2 on the first lap, yeah, you probably wasted a good lot of points of that. But again, it's not like you could have foreseen the rest of the race happening how it did. Same goes for the Jordan incident, with especially for a team like Jordan, with how reliable the Peugeot engine was. Could have just as well ended up both engines blowing up and no points either way. But this one, it was a very straightforward situation where they struggled to keep the McLaren behind in the changing conditions, where they had the 1-2, where they were looking to secure it, and Vettel wasted that chance, and as you said, was coddled by his team in a ridiculous manner. So yeah, in terms of unnecessariness, it is also a very high contender, because yeah, Vettel could have overtaken him there, which he tried to do, but he could have just waited. He could have gone forward into the much safer turn 1. He could have tried the outside line, even if that would have put him in a worse position for the chicanes. So there were many ways for Sepp to avoid this whole mess and still take the lead, which obviously a driver wants. And yeah, it's just peak unnecessary, peak bad, just very much how not to do it when racing your teammate, especially again in varying conditions, the not quite intermediate wetness. 5 out of 5. Just clumsy stuff.
Yeah, and like, let's not forget as well, the Monaco Grand Prix was the previous race where they scored a 1-2 and they were leading the championship, co-leading the championship. It was a close championship still. Vettel's reliability especially wasn't very good. It could have cost them the whole championship. I also was tempted to put this for the If Gap Car Award, which I decided to go with worst optics, because I think that's the most important thing for me, the unique thing about this crash, which I always take away from it. And I might finish this by saying, let's not forget that the McLarens also bumped into each other later on in the race when they were fighting for the lead, because Button was trying to take the lead off of Hamilton, and they actually did have a couple of scrapes as they were doing so. And
we nearly could have had a double header.
Yeah, we could genuinely have had a double header. I think it would have been someone like Robert Kubica would have won the race. No, silly me, what am I talking about? It would have been Mark Webber who would have won the race, which would have been really funny if that McLarens had taken each other out and Webber had won anyway.
That would have altered this very episode to its core. Like, then, if those two accidents happened, or if that second hypothetical accident happened, the 2010 crashes would have been the headline of this episode. I guarantee you that.
So let's imagine two alternative crashes. Webber and Vettel take each other out, and then Hamilton and Button take each other out. The top 3 would have been Michael Schumacher, Nico Rosberg, and Robert Kubica.
Oh my god.
Can you imagine Schumacher inheriting a win because everyone else took each other out?
Wait, those two were also teammates. What am I saying?
That's true. And according to Wikipedia, they finished the race 1 second apart from one another. Ouch. So then we would have had Robert Kubica, followed by Felipe Massa and Fernando Alonso, with Adrian Sutil in 4th, Kamu Kobayashi and Pedro de la Rosa in 5th and 6th, Alguersuari in 7th. No, we're about 2. I was trying to count down to see if the Virgins would have made themselves into the points, but sadly we would have needed the Saubers to take each other out and the Ferraris.
Oh well.
And I think then we would have got Timo Glock in 10th.
But it also would have been very funny to have Mercedes first 1-2 because 2 other teams late eliminated themselves, so we wouldn't even need the Mercedes to take themselves off the grid. This is absolutely hilarious story, but alas, it wasn't meant to be. Anyway, on to the next one. And while we talk about teammates taking themselves out of the lead is bad, what about a teammate taking a teammate out when the latter teammate is trying to lap you?
Yeah, when there's actually something at stake as well. Like, we're talking about Andrea De Cesaris and Alex Caffey at the United States Grand Prix of 1989. Caffey was driving excellently. He was in 5th. And De Cesaris was behind him in the race, a lap behind, and Caffey was coming to lap him.
And De Cesaris, in his ever-eluding wisdom, decided to cut off Caffey and end the Italian's race in a very, 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 very stupid way.
Yeah, it's a bit of a bizarre crash when you watch it because, they're coming into a left-hander. Again, I would put this in the same thing where it's like, Caffey could probably have picked a better place to go past, but also he was driving past his teammate, so he was probably expecting to be let through. But Caffey tries to go for the inside on a left-hander, and De Cesaris just drives on the same line he would have otherwise. Basically, he taps, his rear left taps into Caffey, who then gets spun straight into the wall on his left, and he's out on the spot from 5th place. De Cesaris said that he had no idea that Caffey was even there. He said he felt a bump, but had no idea that he just thought he'd hit like a pothole, is basically how he described it. Which, if you watch the replay, the driving kind of corroborates it, because De Cesaris doesn't make any change to his driving whatsoever, and before or after the crash, he just kind of carries on his merry way as if nothing had happened. And it's just like, it's a bit bizarre. Like, De Cesaris had a crashing reputation, which we've spoken about in the previous episode about how it may not have been earned for the right reasons. But I give this the reputation earned award, because this is the one time when he crashed, it was 100% his fault, but it was someone else who had to suffer. So poor Alex Caffey.
Yeah, the thing is, the points you mentioned are the reasons why I didn't also give it a 5 out of 5, but quote unquote only 4 stars, because yeah, it's a different time. You have to remember, nowadays, obviously, if a driver were about to lap his teammate, the team radio would be alert, warning him, hey, that guy, your teammate is coming through, do not hold him up under absolutely no circumstances. But we have to remember it's 1989, Scuderia Italia weren't the richest of teams, so they probably had team radio, but God knows what quality it was. Whether they even themselves were aware that Caffey was coming up to lap De Cesaris, because it's not like they had full track radar as teams have nowadays. It wasn't the blue flag era where Caffey would have where De Cesaris would have been given warning roughly a kilometer before Caffey was even there. So it's just one of those things where you have to remember it's a different time. This, of course, doesn't excuse De Cesaris, and obviously, if he only felt a bump, and thought it was something pothole related, then he wasn't looking in his mirrors, which kinda is cliche for a crashy driver. But yeah, it's just not quite as horrible as other crashes mentioned before, but with the essential position for Scuderia Italia being lost, with the way it happened when someone is lapped, it's worse than a normal teammate collision, but it has some justifying circumstances to avoid the 5 out of 5 range, the 5-star range.
I don't think it had any major effects on the championship either, but it's still fifth. Fifth is fifth was very important. The points were incredibly important back in those days for the backmarkers. So.
And rarer to get because of the lower point paying position.
Our next example is another backmarker crash. This time for P Nowhere, but we're talking about the last lap crash between Gianni Morbidelli and Pierluigi Martini. So this teammate collision is probably the only one which wasn't caused by either of them. It was caused by the ever talented, ever wonderful Alex Zarnardi, who for some reason in a deathmatch for P Nowhere decided to plonk Morbidelli off the road from his Jordan for no real reason. He kind of just went straight into one of the, I think it was the bridge? No, sorry, it's Spain. I'm getting my corners mixed up. Yes. But he was one of the left-handers, bumps Morbidelli off the road, who then spins, trying to turn left, spins himself back onto the road, and then drives straight into his teammate, Pierluigi Martini, who was actually a lap behind both of them. So it wasn't even on the same piece of tarmac in racing terms. It's a very bizarre crash. It reminds me a bit of the Mark Webber Nico Rosberg crash, if you remember, at Korea in 2010. Webber spins off in the rain and spins himself back on straight into the path of Rosberg's Mercedes and takes them both out. It's a bit like that, whereby Morbidelli is more like a passenger and Martini was just the unfortunate victim getting T-boned in the side.
Yeah, that's why I'm going to give my rating out quickly. Whereas most previous 3 out of 5 crashes where I don't really have much to say on that one, this is more the exact opposite. Like, what can you even say about that one? This is just so very out of this world in terms of teammate collisions that, yeah, it's a 3 out of 3 stars just because it defies the qualification of being particularly bad or particularly not bad. No, I was about to say team collisions being good, but you get the point.
Yeah.
It defies this convention because it's just, what the hell?
Yeah. It's also maybe a bit telling of Alex Zanardi. Zanardi is a very easy guy to like. He's a very chatty guy. He always comes across as lovely. But there's always that question mark of like, oh, was he just in the bad equipment? Was he just never given the right things? Because he won karts, was it twice?
Yeah.
Yada, yada, yada. He could have been a great talent in Formula One. And then you watch crashes like that and you're like,
nah, I don't know about that one.
Yeah, maybe it was just never meant to be.
Yeah,
maybe it was just never meant to be.
Yeah, some people are just made for different series, simple as that. Even if they are on paper somewhat similar, like the American open wheel scene and the Formula One cars, like in theory they aren't that far apart, but as anyone who has driven either will tell you, it's worlds apart. So yeah, Zanardi was just not quite that Formula One guy, and some silly stuff like this very much only serves to emphasize that point. So yeah, I fully agree.
Let's end this podcast. We have the final 3 crashes, which is actually a couple of extra ones. If you notice, we've actually peppered a discussion of these crashes with a couple of extra ones, which also happened in the background or previous races, or even in the same races with Turkey. This is 3 specific crashes as shown to us in the video, all involving a certain French driver called Esteban Ocon. I think we'll do these. Should we do these chronologically?
That makes sense, yes.
Let's go from the Belgian Grand Prix of 2017, which,
funnily enough, is actually the last crash in that video. So,
yeah, it's a funny one because we could actually go back a few races. Let's go back a few races. So in the Canadian Grand Prix of 2017, Ocon and Perez did not get along. Ocon especially would just rail against Perez in post-race interviews, especially after Canada. I checked our community, and the majority of our community gave Perez the reject of the race for that race for holding up Ocon. Mm-hmm. Basically, the Force Indias were in 4th and 5th, potentially in 3rd and 4th. trying to grab a podium. Perez was ahead, but not giving up the place. Ocon was slightly faster, and he was railing on the team radio, let me pass, I'm faster, yada, yada. And Perez held his position. Ocon tries a few passes. Perez does not let him have it. Vettel gets past them both. They both lose the podium. They're both a couple of seconds off. Yada, yada, yada. Lots and lots of whining, blah, 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 blahing after the race. And then let's go forward a couple of races. Oh, look. One race after, Baku. What should happen is the first lap, the Force Indians are driving in something like 4th and 5th yet again. Oh wow, this would be a fantastic race result for the team. And Ocon slams Perez into the wall at the famous left-hander, which you may remember De Vries crashed out at in qualifying just this year. Baku 2017 is somewhat overshadowed by another crash, which happened between two drivers towards the front of the race. But towards the back on the first lap, the Force Indians took each other out. Perez was out on the spot, and Ocon had to pit and finish something like 7th or 8th. So they weren't very happy with one another. And then, 3 races after that, they go on the first turn. The Force Indians are side by side at the Hungaroring. What should happen? Perez pushes Ocon off the track and slices off a nice piece of his bodywork. And then one race after that is the Belgian Grand Prix, which is what the first one that we're actually supposed to be talking about it. So just for context, they've hit each other a lot at this point. So what happened at the Belgian Grand Prix?
Yeah, we have the situation where Ocon has a good run out of La Source, is trying to slipstream with Perez, trying to go by him, takes the inside line. Perez does not even entertain the notion of yielding, and where there's no room, cars make contact with each other, and Ocon ended up clipping his... I think it was not just the front wing, but the front wing was involved with the wall in a very, very similar to what could have happened had Michael Schumacher not seen sense at the 2010 Hungarian Grand Prix, just to give a rough visualization for those who haven't seen the clip. And
Those are quite similar, yeah.
yeah, it's just... And then, obviously, Ocon damaged car, spins, was it through Rouge or after Old Rouge? I'm not sure.
Like, they hated each other. Perez has always come across as a nice guy. Like, I don't know anyone who really, like, has a bad reputation for Perez, but Esteban Ocon did not get on with Perez. We were actually joking. We were speaking in, like, a previous podcast or two ago that... Pascal Wehrlein had this quote, difficult to work with relationship, and how Ocon also has a difficult to work with relationship. But at the same time, Ocon and Wehrlein were actually teammates, and I don't know anything. I've never heard anything about them ever having problems with each other, but maybe they did hate each other behind the scenes. We just don't know about it.
Oh, I said it's this the same way it's like when you try to put two magnets with the same polarity together, then that they bounce off each other, that they were so difficult to work with that they cancelled each other out.
Yeah, maybe they have the exact same personality type, so they love each other. Maybe they're best friends. Who knows?
We should try to find out. Has anyone gotten their personal contact details? Can you please dox them for us? Actually, don't if you are listening to this.
I would love a GP Rejects interview with Pascal Wehrlein where we only talk about his relationship with Esteban Ocon.
It would be the best episode of all time.
It would be a wonderfully surreal podcast. But this is just like, who do we place blame on for any of these crashes? Kind of swaps around between them. They're both as bad as each other. It's not really worth going into each one and saying, oh, this one is Perez's fault, this one is Ocon's fault. But this is only Belgium 2017. And we're already at this, like, we're halfway through one season of them being teammates together, and there have been 4 crashes between them in the space of about 6 or 7 races. Did you have a rating or a podium, or sorry, a rating or an award specifically for the Belgian Grand Prix?
Well, I actually gave it a 3 out of 5. I was thinking about a 4 out of 5, but there we go back into something tying this last section into the first one a bit, in the sense that I do feel that a driver behind, and again, we have the same situation where Ocon was completely behind Perez. Like, there was no side-by-side action. This wasn't Paris seeing, okay, I'm going to get past either way, might as well turn in on him. No, this was just Paris over-aggressively defending his position while being ahead. And this is where the point comes where Ocon has to say, yeah, sucks, but he's a dick, but I have to back out of this one just to save my own skin. And that's what it dropped it back from a 4 out of 5 to a 3 out of 5, so...
Yep.
It's not
I can agree with that.
It's not as extremely unnecessary as it would have been if they had been side by side, and that point makes no sense now that I speak it out loud, but you get the idea.
Yeah. It was avoidable, but they didn't avoid it. Whereas, like, it was much more avoidable than it could have been, so it wasn't quite so inevitable. Yeah. The second crash that they had was the second video crash they had was the following year at Singapore.
And this one is actually fascinating because, well, let me rephrase that. The accident itself is not fascinating at all. Like, it's just a bit more space was needed than there actually was, and it ended with one of the Force Indias. I think they were still the Force Indias at the time. Yeah, the Force Indias in the wall. And the thing is, it is fascinating not because of the crash itself, but because it was such a harmless, such a forgettable, really, teammate collision. After all the story we just went over, all the ridiculous animosity in 2017, then comes this accident in Singapore, and it's really just a giant nothing burger, so...
Yeah.
By teammate collision standards, obviously.
The most interesting thing I think about it is the fact that when you listen to it on the replay, like, David Croft is absolutely relishing the fact that they're coming together. He's so excited. Hey, look, they're crashing again for the 5th time. It reminds me of when Damon Hill crashed out of Suzuka in 1995 in the rain, and Jonathan Palmer just shouts, "He's done it again! He's done it again!" And you can just hear this, like...
It's sort of like in the schoolyard, if you... Back in when you were school children or teenagers, and you knew this one guy had a fancy for one of the girls, and every time you see them talk about whatever it was they were talking about, you'd be like, sort of like that.
It's like there's that sense of, like, because the commentators can't really take sides, although you can usually hear the bias creeping in. They don't usually ever publicly take sides, at least not like explicitly in their words. But it's one of those things like that where it's like you could just hear Jonathan Palmer break character.
He wanted it so bad.
How has Damon Hill crashed for like the 3rd race in a row? How is this possible? He's done it again. Or like, how are Perez and Ocon crashing into each other again? I'm so excited. It's happening again. Woo!
Yeah.
We get another one for the book.
To be fair to the announcers, like, obviously their job depends on making the racing we see as exciting as possible, and when you get the kind of narrative sports has, you obviously, that is what sports lives on as a entertainment product. Yeah. And so obviously if you see something, I can talk about this, I can talk about this, it's sort of like, at least that's how I experience it. When I look at events nowadays at racing stories, and like, is that grabber trap material? Is that grabber trap material?
Yeah, and I mean that goes into the next one as well. But I won't jump in there too quickly because we still have our. Did you have a rating and a potential final comment about the Singapore one in particular? Yeah,
my rating is 2 out of 5 because, as I said, as an accident, as a teammate collision, it's not really a big drama. It's just, again, I think it was also very early in the race, but correct me if I'm wrong on that. And
yeah, I think it was literally the first or the second lap.
Yeah, and then it was just, again, as I said, slightly more space needed than there was there, like the stuff you probably would have gotten away with on a normal road course. And just, yeah, sucks for Force India, but it's not really where I say, this guy's at fault or that guy's at fault. Whereas as a steward, I would have to be like, this guy needs a penalty. And whereas a team boss, I would say like, you're fired. But just, well, that is that sucks. But yeah, 2 out of 5 stars. Nothing special, nothing too horrible, but also not completely boring. Yeah.
Yeah, like, and I don't want to say that Perez is not at fault. I did say a few minutes ago that like Ocon is famously difficult to work with. He's been tarred with that unfortunate brush. It's not to say that Perez isn't at fault, because he definitely was for at least 1 or 2 of those collisions. But it's like, it's when it, when the same person is causing involved in all these issues, you start to sort of put 2 and 2 together. And I guess that brings us to our final video, which is the most recent one as well, I think, the Australian Grand Prix this year, where Esteban Ocon crashed with his current teammate Pierre Gasly.
Yes, this one is a very peculiar one. After the red flag late in the race control decided on a standing restart, and as standing starts occasionally do, it ended up with a crash that Gasly rejoined the track as he was pushed off it, obviously, and Ocon was left with nowhere really to go, which makes this accident fascinating, because earlier in the podcast, I often describe the situation how I would look at it from a stewarding perspective and a team boss perspective. And this is fascinating, because I don't think my 2 perspectives on these things could be further apart on this one. The race steward in me is clearly saying, careless rejoin by Gasly, slap him with the entire book, like the entire book. But the team boss in me would say, Ocon, why did you not brake? Why did you not back out? You saw that he didn't see you, that he didn't knew you were there. Why aren't you braking? Did you have someone behind you that couldn't brake, or what was the thinking there, boy? So this is a very interesting one in that regard, because again, Stewart Lennart and team boss Lennart, 2 completely different reactions.
Yeah, it's also like, on the replay, it also shows that like Gasly, for example, Ocon kind of finds himself trapped, because he finds himself alongside Gasly, and at that point he can't. At that point he's locked himself in, and then when the door is closing and closing and closing, it's like okay, it's done. So you're right. Ocon does put himself into that situation. Perhaps, yeah. You should never, even if he is your teammate, you should probably never put that much faith in the person in front of you.
Precisely.
Especially when you're going around with 50 other cars, to think about. Ocon put himself in a very large risk when he.
Yeah,
when he did
even
that,
though, again, as far as purely from a racing controlling perspective, from the route perspective, it was Gasly who caused the problem.
This is the most interesting one for a future discussion, because most of these are between drivers most of them aren't even on the grid anymore. But the Gasly and Ocon one's interesting because I don't know what the official beef is between them, but I think a couple of years ago they fell out because of someone messed around with someone else's girlfriend or something like that. I don't know what the actual story is, but Ocon is the golden boy at Alpine. He effectively got promoted there already many years ago, but when Alonso was gone, Ocon really was like he's
especially after that race win.
Their favorite there, especially after the race win. Gasly is also French, in a French team,
and also a race winner, which I would have forgotten until just now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. He's also a race winner. In both of them have won in extraordinary circumstances, but if they don't get along, we're now in a situation whereby, although sort of probably in the management terms, Ocon is expected to be the ruler of the roost. And now that the team has kind of gone backwards, going through all this management reshuffle as is happening over the summer break, they're sitting in 6th in the championship. Even McLaren have suddenly had a big turnaround and are faster. I wonder how long their super happy new friendship is going to last as teammates, because I don't think either of them are above messing around, even when they are fighting for P nowhere for the rest of the season. It'll be interesting to see how this goes and how long they will last as teammates, because there hasn't really been any drama apart from that crash in Australia. But all it takes is one crash to change a whole to change everything really in the dynamics and tension in a team. So that would be the most interesting one to watch in the future.
Agreed.
I think.
Especially, as you said, with their previous history, it's very easy to, so to speak, reheat beef. Yeah, going to be very interesting to.
The number of drivers. Yeah, as I said, the number of drivers, like for example, Mansell would not work with Piquet after the first time, and he also would not work with Prost, and Prost also would not work with Senna. So that's why you had this bizarre driver lineup changes at Williams. Because like,
do wonder how you wouldn't happen to know how long their contracts with Alpine are, because obviously if one of them is going out at the end of the years, it's going to be a very short beat. But if both of them are contracted for multiple seasons, then we have a Ralph Montoya situation, so to speak.
I have on good authority from Wikipedia that both Gasly and Ocon are both signed to Alpine for next year.
And who are we to doubt Wikipedia?
I for one don't doubt it at all. Not just that, but Gasly's got a 3-year contract. Both of them are 3-year contracts. Damn.
Then we're gonna have some juicy stuff coming up.
Yeah, I think they're both on the end till 2025 at least. I think they're both on the end till the end of 2025. And I think Gasly may actually be on till the end of 2026. Damn.
Yeah. Well,
yeah. I hope that blows up in their face. No, I don't hope anything bad to happen to them. I wouldn't. For
but
once
it would be very funny.
I wouldn't just be in this for the drama. No. But
no, not sorry. All right, that is the end of this lovely video by Formula One management and the end of our discussion on it. We want to thank you very much for your time. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we obviously hope you will enjoy future episodes. Do feel free to subscribe and, of course, comment in the comment section or join the Discord and tell us your opinion on us there. We are always happy to hear from you, and again, we cannot thank you enough for your time. But Jeremy, do you have any lessons for team bosses who are maybe or maybe not be listening to us, or any else, or any future drivers who might be listening to us?
I have one. You'll be very pleased to know. One of my advice I would give would be to hire Rubens Barrichello and hire Fernando Alonso, because between them they have just about the most races of anyone who don't have any teammate collisions that I can think of. It's actually quite incredible when you think about it that Fernando Alonso somehow managed almost 400 races. I'm jinxing him because totally in the next at Zandvoort he's going to smash into Stroll at some point. But I can't think of a single race where he and his teammate actually crashed into one another. So I would say that like it's actually the people who aren't on the list who are maybe the most impressive ones to think about.
Experience certainly matters, but of course, and that is the lesson I have for future team owners and future drivers, it is a matter of proximity, because where teammates are close, teammates collide.